One of the neat things about visiting places like the Highland State Recreation Area is they often use them as a way to preserve pieces of history. And I didn't know this was here. Jesse, did you know this was here?
No, this was not on anything that the DNR said on their website.
So let's show you what we're talking about. But this is, they refer to it as the gatehouse. And it was the entryway to Edsel Ford's property. Back in the 1920s, he and his wife had about 2,400 acres out here, and this was their weekend getaway. It was in quite a bit of disrepair back in 2009, according to one of the signs here from the state, and they were able to do some repairs to it and I guess bring it back to life a little bit so that we're able to still see this cool structure. This was the gateway to their property, and it also included a 3-bedroom house that was attached to it.
Well, we made it to the top and found a sign that said, "Welcome to Haven Hill." So apparently we've arrived. We're currently standing in front of what was the carriage house at one time, and it said that it ended up being the playhouse for the Ford children. So that's kind of cool. What we've sort of learned is that this whole property, about 2,400 acres worth, was Edsel Ford's, weekend getaway. And at some point after he died, it became the state's property, or the state purchased it. And they turned most of it into the state park. And then within the park itself, so currently today, is the Haven Hill Natural Area. And that's someplace else within the park system. But the rest of the park is just called the Highland State Recreation Area, and then the Haven Natural Area is a small part of it. But in Edsel Ford days, the entire property was referred to as Haven Hill. And it's just really cool. It's nice that they've been able to preserve these buildings so that we can get a look at what they were like in the old days.
One of the cool things I read about on the sign here about this carriage house and also about the lodge is a lot of the wood that was used is the same Michigan timber that was used for some of the original Model Ts that Ford was producing, that Henry Ford was producing. And Model Ts were actually used on this property to drag the lumber up and down the hills as needed for construction.
Up the hill from the carriage house was the original lodge, overlooking, I'm assuming, what would have been a gorgeous view of the surrounding area. Unfortunately, it looks like not a whole lot of it is left except for some of the stone foundation.
I'm standing at what apparently would have been one of the fireplaces in the lodge, so it gives you an idea of how big this place was. And as Jesse said, what a really cool view they would have had up here, and some peace and quiet. I guess if you need a weekend getaway, 2,400 acres and some rolling country in what is now Oakland County was a pretty good way to go.
If you don't know who Edsel Ford was, he is the son of Henry Ford. And in 1923, he began buying all of the property that eventually became Haven Hill. At their Hilltop Lodge, their guests enjoyed a swimming pool, tennis courts, even a motorized toboggan run, and just spectacular views of the rolling scenery. In the early 1900s, the rise of the automobile made the isolated rural settings like this one more accessible to the wealthy people. And so they went further into what was then the countryside to build these enormous lodges and estates. Unfortunately, in 1999, the lodge burned to the ground. It had been given to the state of Michigan in 1946 after some of the family had died, and the state actually used it as a state park conference center for many, many years. But it sat empty for a while, and like you said, unfortunately, it burned to the ground, so there's nothing much left but the stone foundation.
As Jesse told you earlier, the state owned this lodge and the property, and they used it as a conference center for many years, but apparently in 1980, the state stopped using it and closed the lodge, and then it burned a number of years later. So it's really unfortunate that this lodge is gone, but I will give them credit. One thing that they did that's kind of cool is they put these concrete markers throughout the area where the lodge was, and they show you where the master bedroom was, where the kitchen was, the dining room, that kind of thing. So it does help you visualize what this place was like in terms of the size of it and the layout.
I'm always amazed when I realize that Henry Ford was friends with Thomas Edison, who was friends with Charles Lindbergh. It's just crazy. And all of those people were here at Haven Hill at different points in their life because they were friends with the Fords and they came to visit them. for all the things that we sometimes do complain about the state parks, like lack of trail systems, I have really, really enjoyed these interpretive signs that they put around the park. It's been a lot of cool history, and as a history buff, I find it fascinating. I'm just a little, I keep laughing to myself though about the "you I don't know," because way to be punny and take the Ford family's information and turn it into a sign.
One of the things though that I think you could spend a lot of time doing here is just wandering around the historic part of it, which is what's left of the Haven Hill estate from the Edsel Ford family. And I know you were a little frustrated because we got here and we found it and it wasn't on the website for the DNR and it wasn't really identified anywhere for us.
No, and if I'd known that, we probably would have planned that this park would have been either a whole day park or just budgeted more time, because once we got around, I mean, we love history. So of course I'm going to read every sign that there is and go snoop around and look at everything. But the fact that this wasn't on the website at all was just frustrating, because it's such a bummer that if you didn't know that, you might skip this park because you'd be like, oh, it's just another trail. So it is a really cool place to see. I'm glad that they were able to preserve it here. And I'm hoping that we were going to be able to come back here so that we can finish checking out the rest of it.